Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebeling, and today is May 2nd. Today could actually be April Fool's Day. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, that was published in 1392, it's believed he meant May 2nd to be April Fool's Day instead of April 1st. Little fun fact for you on May 2nd. Well, I was out in the garden yesterday. The hostas are starting to pop up, and there's no time like the present if you're going to be splitting hostas than when they're first emerging from the ground. I like to take a serrated knife and cut them into little wedges and then dig up just the part that I need, as opposed to digging up the entire plant. Sometimes that goes a little smoother. On the other hand, if it's impossible to get through them, sometimes you really don't have any other choice than to dig up the entire hosta and go for it, and then cut it up kind of like a pizza is what I think of it as. But in any case, I've got tons of hostas, happy to split with my neighbors. I know my dear friend across the street is going to be looking to me for some hostas, so it'll be fun to thin them out a little bit and also just watch her learn and grow as a hosta lover. Well, if you ordered any of your spring bulbs, your spring flowering bulbs online, you're probably getting mailers this week, either in the mailbox or in your email, reminding you to order for fall of 2023. So the 2023 flower bulb collections are out for so many of the different growers. If you have one that you like, make sure to check out their website. I know for myself that I'm putting in a huge order of alliums. Can we ever get enough alliums? And then my other two passions for next spring are scilla and more daffodils. Why not? Hey, if you subscribe to P. Allen Smith's newsletter this past week, he does such a great job of sharing what's going on at his place called Moss Mountain Farm. A bit of a tongue twister for me, but I wanted to talk to you really quick about something that I saw, and that is a recipe for olive oil cake. This was a recipe that he shared back in 2020, and it is a really tasty, pleasant cake for spring. So go ahead and check that out. I'll also put a link to it in the Facebook group for the show. So if you're into making a nice little cake, maybe you have a nice Mother's Day gathering or just want to have a nice little dessert around the house for spring, this olive oil cake from P. Allen Smith could be exactly what you're looking for. Past month, I've been getting bombarded with emails about plant sales. And I'll tell you what, if you're in the Twin Cities area, there is one plant sale I will not miss, and that is the plant sale up at Waseca Farms in Wyoming. It is a true treasure, and it's worth the drive if you're coming from the Twin Cities. Just head north like you're heading to Duluth, and when you hit the Wyoming exit, get off there, head east, and you're going to run right into Waseca Farms, and you're going to be so delighted. It's wonderful. She does a great job. The plants look amazing. The containers are just so gorgeous. And these plants are just so huge. I know that if you were purchasing similar plants in the city, in St. Paul, Minneapolis, you'd probably pay double. So it's a really, really great private plant sale. And if you haven't been, go ahead and check it out and bring your camera because it's a very, very charming little farm. Well, over the weekend, I read a sweet little essay by Sheila Squilante. She's a professor of creative writing at Chatham University. And she wrote a quick little story essentially about her own enjoyment of gardening as a form of mental and physical therapy. And so I love the way she started out this essay. I'll share that with you now, and then I'll read the tail end of it as well. It gets very poignant. But Sheila is a kindred spirit when it comes to gardening. She truly finds a way to center herself just by being in her garden in a way that no other activity can achieve. And she writes, "On my way to the car this morning, I see that the deer have been eating my blackberry bush and that daylilies are coming up near the fence. I must have missed a few bulbs when I pulled out the whole stand last summer. I make a mental note to yank them before they take over and to haul the huge pot of blackberries inside the fence where they will be mostly free from nibblers. The eastern redbud tree is just past bloom, its pink blossoms scattered among last year's leaves and this year's weeds. It's chilly on this late April morning, and I'm still wearing my winter coat to drive my kids to school. Still, I know the consistent warmth is coming, and with it, all the labor and delight of tending a garden." And then this is how she ends this essay, and I just thought that the ending was just so poignant. So she writes, "In the spring of 2021, I lost my mother to small cell lung cancer. She had been a flower gardener when I was a child in Lexington, Kentucky. Petunias and peonies, I think, but roses are what I remember best, growing at the corner of our property up against the railroad tie fence. Mom didn't get to see my garden except in photos on Facebook, but she told me how much she loved watching it transform. She sent me 2 bare root rose bushes that first summer, which was her last summer, and I placed them knowing she would be gone before their pink lemonade blossoms ever emerged. During this sad time, my depression threatened, understandably, to overwhelm. My neighbor across the street would call out across his fence, 'Where's your family? They should be out helping you.' He doesn't understand that I want and need to do this by myself, for myself. Gardening is good for me. Gardening is an instinct. I don't forget to breathe. My heart knows how to beat. And every spring, I put my hands back into rich Pittsburgh soil, knowing that whatever the harvest, it's the process that matters most to me. The clearing away of last year's debris, the watching sprouts push through dirt and mulch, the delight of finally recognizing in June the plant I couldn't identify in April, the one I forgot I had planted in the sadness or happiness or chaos or peace of last year, now unfurling in lush yellow, orange, pink profusion, reminding me to live." Isn't that fantastic? Oh, I knew you would love it. Well, I will put a link to this in the Facebook group for the show. So if you want to read it in full for yourself, and it's a fun little read. It doesn't take long, maybe 5 minutes, but it's just a great post. Sheila Squilante, the creative writing director at Chatham University. Great piece. All right, it's time for today's garden history. It was on this day in 1497 that the Canadian explorer John Cabot set sail from Bristol, England, on his ship Matthew. He was looking for a route to the west, and he found it. He discovered parts of North America on behalf of Henry VII of England. And in case you're wondering why we're talking about John Cabot today, it's because of the climbing rose that's named in his honor. And it's also the rose that got me. I got a thorn from a John Cabot rose in my knuckle and ended up having surgery to clean out the infection about 3 days later. It was quite an ordeal. I think my recovery took about 8 months. So John Cabot rose, actually any rose, not to be trifled with. And it was on this day, May 2nd, in 1519, that Leonardo da Vinci, the mathematician, scientist, painter, and botanist, passed away. Leonardo once said, "We know more about the movement of celestial bodies than about the soil underfoot." He also wrote, "The wisest and noblest teacher is nature itself." And if you're spending any amount of time outdoors, once again, we are learning new lessons in spring. Isn't that the truth? There's always some new development that we've never encountered before, and of course, a few delights. Well, Leonardo continued the study of the flower of life, the Fibonacci sequence. This has been a study that has fascinated for centuries. You can see it in flowers. You can also see it in cell division. And if you've never seen Leonardo's drawings and sketches of flowers, you are missing a real treat. And I think it would make a tremendous wallpaper. Leonardo once wrote about how to make your own perfume. He wrote, "Take some rose water and wash your hands in it, and then take a lavender flower and rub it with your palms, and you will achieve perfume." That timeless rose-lavender combination. It's still a good one. You know, I think about Leonardo every spring when I turn on my sprinkler system, because that consistent watering gives such a huge boost to the garden, and all of a sudden it just comes alive. But Leonardo said, water is the driving force in nature, the power of water. And of course, we know that life on Earth is inextricably bound to water. Nothing grows, nothing lives without water. Leonardo was also a cat fan. He wrote, "The smallest feline is a masterpiece." And in 1517, he made a mechanical lion for the King of France. This lion was designed to walk toward the king and then drop flowers at his feet. Today, you can grow a rose named for Leonardo da Vinci in your garden. It's a beautiful pink rose, very lush, very pleasing, with lots of nice big green leaves to go with those gorgeous blooms. It was Leonardo da Vinci who wrote, "Human subtlety will never devise an invention more beautiful, more simple, or more direct than nature, because in her inventions, nothing is lacking and nothing is superfluous." And today in 1803, Napoleon and the United States inked a deal. It was the Louisiana Purchase, and 828,000 square miles of French territory was added to the United States for $27 million. Now, the purchase of this land impacted the Lewis and Clark expedition because they had to explore the area that was bought in addition to the entire Pacific Northwest. And so this was a major effort on the part of the United States to inventory and chronicle the extent of the country. Now, to get ready for this trip, Meriwether Lewis was sent to Philadelphia. And when he was there, he worked with a botanist, a naturalist and physician by the name of Benjamin Smith Barton. He was the expert in Philadelphia. And so he tutored Meriwether Lewis to get him ready, because Lewis had really no knowledge of natural history or plants. And so he needed to basically cram all this information in so that he could maximize what he was seeing and collecting. Now, in addition to all of this homework, all of this studying about horticulture and botany and the natural world, Meriwether made one other purchase for $20. He bought himself a big, beautiful Newfoundland dog, and he named him Seaman. Always nice to have a little dog with you when you're exploring. And it was on this day, May 2nd in 1806, that the garden writer John Abercrombie died. The previous day, John had fallen down some steps. He had broken his hip a few weeks earlier, and so this last Fall is what did him in. John was a true character. He loved to drink tea. He was a vegetarian. He was Scottish, and he was a lifelong gardener. His biggest success was his book, Every Man His Own Garden. John would go on to write other books on gardening, like The Garden Mushroom, The Complete Wall and Tree Pruner, that came out in 1783, and The Gardener's Daily Assistant, which came out in 1786. But none of them rose to the level of popularity as Every Man His Own Gardener. John and his wife had 17 children, and they all died before him, the last one dying about 10 years before he died on this day in 1806. And it was on this day, May 2nd in 1867, that a man named Thomas Hanbury bought a property in the French Riviera that he called La Mortala. Now, in 1913, the Botanical Journal shared the story of Thomas and his brother Daniel, and it also described the moment that Thomas saw his property for the very first time. It said, "It had been the dream of Thomas Hanbury from his early youth to make a garden in a southern climate and to share its pleasures and botanical interests with his favorite brother. While staying in the Riviera in the spring of 1867, after many years of work in the East, Thomas decided to carry out his plan. He was first inclined to buy Cap Martin, but he gave up the idea as soon as he became acquainted with the little cape of La Mortala. As he first approached it by the sea, he was struck by the marvelous beauty of this spot. A house, once the mansion of a noble family, but at the time was almost a ruin, stood on a high commanding position. Above it was the little village, and beyond, the mountains. To the east was vineyards and olive terraces, and to the west was a ravine, home to Aleppo pines. So Thomas made the purchase of this incredible property back in May of 1867, and by July, he returned with his brother, and together the two of them started to transform both the home and the garden. The article says that Thomas's first goal was to get planting because the property had been destroyed by goats and the local villagers who had come in and taken what they wanted from the property during all the years that it was left unoccupied. Now, Thomas and Daniel went all out when it came to selecting plants for this property. And by 1913, the Botanical Journal said that there were over 5,000 different species of plants, including the opuntia or the prickly pear cactus and succulents. They were known for that, so they were way ahead of their time. Thomas loved collecting rare and valuable plants, and he found a home for all of them on this beautiful estate. Now, for the most part, it was Thomas and his brother Daniel that did the bulk of the installations, but a year later, they did manage to find a gardener to help them. His name was Ludwig Winter, and he stayed there for about 6 years, and it was about a year after they hired him that Thomas's brother Daniel died. This was a great loss to Thomas, but he found solace in his family and friends, and of course, in his gorgeous estate at La Mortala. Thomas spent the last 28 years of his life there. The Botanical Journal says that he knew almost every plant in his garden, and that the most precious to him were those plants that reminded him of his beloved brother. Thomas went on to found the Botanical Institute at the University of Genoa, and the herbarium there was named in his honor. It was called the Institute Hanbury, and it was commemorated in 1892. Well, as Thomas grew older, the Riviera grew more popular, and soon his property was opened to the public 5 days a week. And this article in the journal says, the garden is practically never without flowers. And by the way, that's still true today. I just took a tour via a YouTube video, and the garden is still beautiful. They write, as soon as the autumnal rains set in, the flowering begins and continues on. By May, almost every plant is in flower. The most remarkable include the Banksian rose, which is a yellow rose, Fortune's yellow rose, the sweet-scented pittosporum, the wonderful crimson Peruvian magic tree, and the beautiful blue spikes of Canarian echium, which is in the borage family, and it's also known as the Tower of Jewels. So you can about imagine how gorgeous that is. But in a nutshell, it's a very different growing zone than most of us get to enjoy. But Thomas knew that even in that growing zone, there were limitations and frustrations and challenges. It was Thomas Hanbury who said, never go against nature. And he used that as his philosophy when he was planning gardens, when he was working with plants, when he was trying to figure out what worked and what didn't. Even in the French Riviera, never go against nature. And it was on this day, May 2nd, in 1928, that folks were lined up to see the lilac blooms at Huldah Klager's in Woodland, Washington. Well, this is an excerpt from a book by Jane Kirkpatrick, who wrote a book about the life of Huldah Klager called Where Lilacs Still Bloom. In it, she quotes Huldah, "Beauty matters. It does. God gave us flowers for a reason. Flowers remind us to put away fear, to stop our rushing and running and worrying about this and that, and for a moment to have a piece of paradise right here on earth." This is such a great little book. In fact, I just ordered a copy on Amazon, and I want to say I got it for around $2. So it's a great little steal and a fun little read for spring. It's called Where the Lilacs Still Bloom. But here's this excerpt for today, and it was almost 100 years ago, back in 1928. Here's what Jane wrote. There were 2 articles about Huldah's lilacs in 1928. One was in Better Homes and Gardens, and the other appeared on May 2nd in the Lewis River News. The latter article appeared just in time for Lilac Days and helped promote Planters Day, following in June. In the afternoon, one account showed 400 cars parked at Huldah Klager's lilac garden in 1 hour, the road being lined for a quarter of a mile. It is estimated that at least 2,500 people were there for the day, coming from points all the way from Seattle, and there were more cars during the week. Well, today you can go and visit the Huldah Klager Lilac Gardens. It's a nonprofit garden, and of course it specializes in lilacs. The gardens are open 10 to 4 daily. There's a $4 admission fee, except during lilac season, when the admission fee is $5. All right, it's time for today's garden book. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, A Gardener's Guide to Botany by Scott Zona. Well, this book came out in December of 2022, and the subtitle is The Biology Behind the Plants You Love, How They Grow, and What They Need. And I think it's that last part that more gardeners are intrigued by. But if you're a true botany geek, you will love every page of Scott's book. I'm picking it up right now. So if you hear that little crackle and crunch, it's me opening the cover of this book. But I wanted to share with you a little bit from the preface of Scott's book. Scott, by the way, is truly an expert. He's a research botanist by training, and his undergraduate degree is in horticulture. So he's a lifelong gardener and a trained expert. He's a conscious competent. He knows exactly what he's writing about. But here's what he wrote in the preface of his book. As I sit down to write, I gaze at the windowsill near my desk. On it sits a dwarf sansevieria forming little rosettes of deep green leaves. Above it hangs a slab of cork on which is mounted a tiny air plant that is pushing out oversized violet flowers, one at a time. Nearby are two plants, an agave and an aloe, that have similar forms, but one evolved from Mexico and the other in South America. Above them, a furry-leaved peperomia and a hybrid philodendron both grow contentedly in the diffuse light that reaches the shelf next to the window. My most curious visitors might ask a question about a plant or two, and when that happens, I can barely contain my delight. There is so much to tell. Well, this book starts out with a chapter called Being a Plant. And if you are a bit of an empath, you may feel that you understand what it's like to be a plant. But Scott is going to tell you scientifically, what does it mean to be a plant? He writes in chapter 1, for most people, the plant kingdom is a foreign land. Its inscrutable inhabitants are all around us, but they communicate in a language that seems unintelligible and untranslatable. Their social interactions are different, their currency doesn't fit in our wallet, and their cuisine, well, it's nothing like what we eat at home. In the plant kingdom, we are tourists. Well, taking you on a tour of Scott's book here, chapter 2 talks about the plant parts and what they do. So a little bit of Plant 101 here. Then the next 3 chapters are devoted to what plants need. And so the chapters cover 3 things. Can you guess what they are? Water. Chapter 4 is light. And then chapter 5 is nutrients. Chapter 6 talks about defense. Chapter 7 is reproduction. Makes sense. And then last but not least, seed dispersal. So this is a fantastic book that's going to get to the bottom of so many of your questions about plants, why they do what they do, and why maybe we're missing the mark as gardeners when it comes to taking care of them and cultivating them. So I would say this book is for the very serious and curious gardener, and that just may be you. This book was a 2023 American Horticulture Society Award winner. I love the cover. It's beautiful. And of course, I love the title, A Gardener's Guide to Botany. This is the perfect book to round out your collection if you have the Botany in a Day book. It looks like a big botany workbook. I love that book. This book is a really great companion to that. There's also a book called Botany for Gardeners. And when I think about Scott's book here, I will be putting it on the shelf right beside both of those, Botany in a Day and Botany for Gardeners. And so now we're adding A Gardener's Guide to Botany. I love it. This book is 256 pages that will amp up your understanding of plants. No more mystery and all of the answers that you've been looking for. You can get a copy of A Gardener's Guide to Botany by Scott Zona and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $20. And that's a steal. Good pick. All right, we end the show today by celebrating the birthday of Georg Philipp Friedrich Freiherr von Hardenberg, who is definitely better known by his pen name, Novalis. He was an 18th century German poet and writer, mystic and philosopher of early German Romanticism. Well, all last week I was watching videos about Novalis. He led such an interesting but short life. He had a tragic romance. He fell in love with a young girl who tragically died of tuberculosis. And then Novalis himself died young. He died at 28 of tuberculosis as well. But in his very short life, he accomplished so much, including the fact that during his life, he had 3 moments of mystical revelation, which led to a deeper understanding about the world and time and humanity. And this is what makes him such a fascinating person to look back at. Now, one of the things that we remember Novalis for is his fascination with blue flowers. He made the blue flower a symbol for German Romanticism. To Novalis, the blue flower represented romantic yearning. It also represented a point of unification between humanity and nature. It represented life, but it also represented death. And if you are a gardener who has been bitten by the blue flower bug, and who hasn't? I mean, who does not love a blue flower? They're so rare. They are so captivating. Well, then you can definitely relate to Novalis, why the blue flower became so significant in his writing. Now, the book where Novalis wrote about the blue flower is a book called Henry of Ofterdingen. And it's here where we get these marvelous quotes about the blue flower, which some believe was a heliotrope and which others believe was a cornflower. But whatever the case, the symbolism of the blue flower became very important. Novalis wrote, "It is not the treasures that have stirred in me such an unspeakable longing. I care not for wealth and riches, but that blue flower I do long to see. It haunts me, and I can think and dream of nothing else." And that reminds me of what it was like to be a new gardener some 30 years ago, and a friend got me on to growing delphinium. And I felt just like Novalis. I could not stop thinking about the delphinium and imagining them at maturity around the 4th of July, standing about 5 to 6 feet tall, these beautiful blue spikes. And of course, my dream of the delphinium always surpassed what the actual delphinium looked like. And yet, I still grew them. I loved them. And I did that for about 10 years. So there you go. The call and the power of the blue flower. Novalis writes later in the book, he saw nothing but the blue flower, and he gazed at it for a long time with indescribable tenderness. Those blue flowers really command our attention. Well, I'll end with this last quote. It's a flower quote from Novalis, and it'll definitely get you thinking. He was a very insightful philosopher and a lover of nature, and he believed in the answers that could be found in nature. And so what he does here in this quote is he asks a series of questions. And like all good philosophers, Novalis knows that the answer is in the questions, and that the questions are more powerful than the answers. Novalis writes, "What if you slept? And what if in your sleep you dreamed? And what if in your dream you went to heaven and plucked a strange and beautiful flower? And what if, when you awoke, you had the flower in your hand? Ah, what then?" Great question to end today's show on. Well, that's it for the Daily Gardener. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to check out that olive oil cake recipe. I will have that in the Facebook group for the show, along with a few of the other items that I mentioned. You can get your spring flower bulbs reserved at your favorite vendor. That's something else that you can do this week. You can also check on the progress of your hostas. You can split a few of them. You can check out a few plant sales. And like Sheila Squilante, hopefully you can find some peace and healing in your garden. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of the Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to the Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. Hi there, Daily Gardeners. I just wanted to let you know really quick that I'm taking the next 2 weeks off. I'm starting up my student gardener program. I also have my 2 kids coming home from college. I am opening up the garden up at the cabin, and I have a speaking engagement that I need to prepare for on Monday. I'm speaking on the 2023 garden, and I'm putting together some botanical history and folklore and fun facts, as well as a curated list of summer reading so that you can grow that garden library. Sound familiar? So my plate is full, but I will be back with you again on Tuesday, May 16th. So until then, I hope you have a chance to get some work done because I know we all have so much to do in the garden. All right, be safe.